Good evening. My name is Michael Mercurio. I'm the Executive Director of Cambridge Common Writers, which is an alumni organization for the graduates of the Lesley University Low Residency MFA program in creative writing. We are a volunteer-run organization that works to support, promote, and celebrate the extraordinary writers who polish their craft under the guidance of the widely published and award-winning faculty mentors who teach at Lesley. You can find out more about Cambridge Common Writers at the link that I'm going to drop in the chat window. Tonight, Cambridge Common Writers has the distinct pleasure of hosting this book launch for one of those extraordinary writers, Celeste Mohammed, as she brings her book, Pleasantview, into the public view. If you check the chat again, you'll see links for how you can order a copy for yourself, and copies for people you love too, if you're so inclined. On behalf of Cambridge Common Writers and our wonderful alumni board, we want to thank you again for being with us tonight. It's now my pleasure to hand things over to Michael Lowenthal and Hester Kaplan, two of Celeste's faculty mentors.
Good evening, everybody. It is so thrilling for me, and I think I speak for Michael, to be here and for Celeste's launch. It's just so exciting, and I wish I could express to you just how much pride I think we feel when something like this happens. Something like this being a book and a wonderful writer like Celeste. So I'm going to give just a very brief introduction, and then Michael and I are going to chat for a second. Right, Michael? Want to add anything?
No, I just second what you said, that there's no greater pride or pleasure as a mentor than seeing somebody come to this stage. And to be totally honest, it's much more pleasurable to me than any publication of my own. It's because it's so unfraught. It's just pure joy. So happy to be here.
Yes, it is pure joy. So Celeste Muhammad graduated from Lesley in 2016. A native of Trinidad and Tobago, she is a writer, a lawyer, and a mother of Sarai, the greatest new influencer on the scene. Her work has appeared in the New England Review, Litmag, Epiphany, the Rumpus, among other places. She is the recipient of a 2018 Penn Robert J. Dau Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers. She was also awarded the 2019 Virginia Woolf Award for Short Fiction and the 2017 John D. Gardner Memorial Prize for Fiction. Pleasantview is her first book. And about the book, in an early pre-pub review, Publishers Weekly writes, Muhammad's engaging debut novel in stories reveals the intimate connections of the ethnically and linguistically diverse citizens of a fictional town in Trinidad and Tobago. Throughout the stories barrel from charm to tragedy and back again, making for a memorable and moving immersion. So in a minute, you're going to hear from Celeste, and then a little bit later, you're going to hear Celeste and Tony Eprel in conversation. But first, Michael and I are going to have a little chat as though we're just, sitting around with a couple beers or something, and, just doing this thing. So, Michael, is there a moment when you worked with Celeste that stands out for you?
Why, that's interesting, Hester. I hadn't thought of that, but now that you ask, it's actually not exactly a moment, but I just want to share with people a brief little arc of what it was like to work with Celeste. And I went back and I looked at our very first communication. Before I work with somebody for a semester, I usually send a bunch of questions and I ask for what they're worried about. And the very first email from Celeste said, this is in relation to the Lesley people know this, but in the third semester, students have to write an essay about some problem of craft. And she said, in relation to craft essay, I must confess I am clueless. I get the distinct impression from both my previous mentors that I am pretty bad at craft annotations. I never know what I'm supposed to be talking about. I'm an extreme novitiate at writing, coming to this program with no previous creative writing tutelage, and I feel out of my depth. I hope I haven't scared you off. Yikes. But within just a month, she then sent me this, and apologized if there's family members on the Zoom. She says, I've been reading a lot and thinking about this craft essay. Regrettably, I haven't pinned it down yet, but I'm toying with this topic. The best sex I've ever had. Sorry, read. And in point of fact, she ended up writing one of the best craft essays I've ever seen. And it was on what she called sexual impressionism. And she coined that term, sexual impressionism, the art of doing more with less. And she analyzed everyone and everything from John Updike and Junot Diaz to the bridges of Madison County and 50 Shades of Grey. And, we always hope to learn from our students, but for me, this is one of those rare, unforgettable times when a student really made me see an aspect of craft in a totally new way, and I'll never forget it. I always think about sexual impressionism when I'm working on my own stuff. So thank you, Celeste. But it makes me wonder, Hester, is there any moment, for example, that you can think of working with Celeste that comes to mind?
That's interesting that you should ask, Michael, because in fact, I was thinking about a moment that Celeste and I were discussing back and forth in emails, how to balance moments of greater and lesser intensity in a story that she was working on. And so she wrote me, I have always thought or have been led to believe that the hallmark of good literary fiction is subtlety. Something I was really trying for in this story because I've generally lacked it in everything I've written before. How does a good writer achieve subtlety while pushing the work to extremes? I can't wrap my mind around it. So I remember this moment really specifically because, and this was in Celeste's first semester, so it was very early on, because it strikes me that this is a question that every writer asks every time they sit down to write something. And it is not a question that ever can really be answered. It's the question that you engage with. And so I think at that moment I had a sort of a peek, my first peek into the kind of focus and intensity and intention that Celeste was going to bring to her work. And so that was a really special moment for me, not for me. So, Michael, I was just wondering, having read the book, are there some lines maybe that stick out for you that are?
Gosh, I wish you had prepped me earlier that I should look through the book and find a line, because
I'm
now
sorry.
I feel sort of put on the spot, but let me just think actually there's something that comes to mind. Having let everybody know about Celeste's brilliance when it comes to writing about sex, I thought I would pick a line that I love from the first story in her collection, that it's not a sex scene, but it's writing, it just shows the layers of complexity that Celeste is so good at evoking when she writes about sexual relationships. And honestly, I could pick dozens of lines, but just one comes to mind. This is from Sunil, who's the narrator of The Dragon's Mouth, and he's breaking out of jail to go find his girl, who he's been having money sent to her while he's been in prison, and he's been desperately hoping that she's waiting for him. Meanwhile, she's actually been sold essentially to a brothel and has been sexually abused, and she's also being supported by another companion every Friday night. And this line is just such a great example also of how Celeste uses voice and Creole to convey so much more meaning than I think standard English ever could. I'm obviously not going to do the accent, but when he's thinking about sending her money in the position she's in, he says, "The 500 I sending every month, it ain't much, but it making a point. No matter who she fuck, she's still my woman. Any man could climb on top of she, but I's the onlyest man making jail for she." I just think there's such incredible layers of complexity and a whole world in that line. So I always remember that one. So I guess we're done here. I mean, unless, Hester, is there by any chance a line or a couple lines that stick out to you as favorites from Celeste?
I think there were. There are. I have a particular fondness for Miss Ivy, who appears throughout the book. She is that, I don't know, she's I want to know Miss Ivy. So this is a line about Miss Ivy from Santi Manity. I hope that I pronounced that right. I looked it up. I listened to it online. So maybe Celeste, you can correct me later if I mispronounced it. Miss Ivy stood, easing the sweaty, heavy fur from her shoulders as she clutched the chair in front of her. She was a tired old rag who'd spent years sitting in dirty water. How many card readings had she pretended to do for old women, young women, and always about a vicious man or a lost child? Too many times she'd lied to give Pleasantview women false hope, to feel like she was helping them, but nothing had ever changed in her life or theirs. Miss Ivy felt tattered, over-soaked, and rank with secret female blood. She was dying to wring herself clean. And I really love that section because it's just writing that gets down to the sort of the raw, unpolished gem. It's really just spectacular. And it achieves exactly what I think Celeste was asking about in the example that I gave before, how to get these moments of subtlety with intensity. And it's, when I reread these lines, I had that feeling that someone had just whispered something very profound and life-changing in my ear. It was just like a sort of fleeting lesson. And so I just thought it was beautiful. And so now it is with huge pleasure and pride that Michael and I turn this over to Celeste.
Yay, Celeste.
Hello, everyone. Guys, oh my gosh, Michael, Hester, I can't believe you went back into my secret emails to you. Anyway, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone who's on right now. I can't see you all, but thank you for coming. I know you have a choice. You had a choice as to how to spend this time, and you chose to be here with me and with my little baby. So thank you very much. And I hope you will bear with me a little bit while I say some more thank yous. Firstly to Hester and Michael for that lovely introduction. You guys are like the co-parents of this book. You are what we call in Trinidad day ones. You've been there from day one. And I care very deeply about both of you. So thank you. Thank you very much. I also want to thank Cambridge Common Writers for hosting this event, led by their esteemed chairman, who is our host, our MC for this evening. And I want to thank the entire Lesley MFA community, the alumni, the faculty. So many of you all have, in one way or another, touched this book. And you rallied around me and around this work like I could never have expected. So if I go to name names, we're going to be here until tomorrow this time. So I will just say to each of you, you know who you are. Thank you. I also want to thank my publisher, Egg Publishing out in New York City, for taking a chance on an unknown gal from a small island and allowing me a seat at the international literary table. And I thank my agent, Jennifer Carlson, who to me has been, she's been more than an agent. She's been more like a divine shepherdess or oracle of all things publication related since she and I met. So thank you, Jen. And lastly, it would be remiss of me to start these proceedings without saying thank you to the agent of all agents, the author and finisher of every work in my life, the person who is responsible for me still being here to share this time with you. Thank you, Lord. Right. So the first story I want to read from for you guys tonight is called Loose, and it was the winner of the 2017 John D. Gardner Memorial Award for Fiction. And I think it's a good place to start. So, Michael, if you will, please.
And Celeste, just make sure I'm actually sharing. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Good. Only a year into using Zoom every day, and I still have to ask.
Declan, that's what you're wearing? Declan had known his wife would be watching in her dressing table mirror as he left the bathroom. Watching, waiting to criticize. He'd known, and yet he went ahead anyway.
What's wrong with this?
Declan, it's a church service. What the elders and the bishop will think.
Look, in the Bible say to render your heart and not your garment.
No, it does not say that.
Listen, my clothes wouldn't matter nothing to Christ. Only as it are fake ass Christians. You understand? So I guess tonight we're gonna see which kind you're really dealing with.
Today was their wedding anniversary. Ruth had asked him to go with her to night service at Pleasantview First Holiness Revival Church, a Pentecostal circus, just like the one his grandma used to drag him to as a boy. Ruth had often invited Declan to church. He'd refused every time.
But today, he had to go. Going to church together was what decent couples did to mark fifth anniversaries. This was what was expected. To not go tonight would be an outright announcement to everyone in Pleasantview that he and Ruth weren't the upstanding school teacher couple they appeared to be. He and Ruth had been the first in their families to earn degrees, he chemistry, she English. They'd been the first in their families to get married, not like his sister Judith, who'd shacked up with her kid's father for 7 years until he left to work in America. Declan and Ruth had been the first to move out of the ghetto, even if it was just across the traffic lights to Hibiscus Park. Every time they went back to Pleasantview to visit friends and family, it was as if those people in the dark were seeing a great light. Morning, miss, morning, sir. Everyone greeted them by their school teacher titles. But it was hard being a shining example, and every so often, it demanded a sacrifice, like tonight. You know, Bishop predicted you would behave so, Ruth said, resuming whatever it was she did these days at her dressing table. Declan stared at the reflection of his wife's face, a 42-year-old woman who no longer wore makeup, perfume, or jewelry. All those little telltale signs of effort, they signaled to a man that his woman still craved him. To Ruth's church, though, they signaled the sin of vanity. Tonight, Declan would show those damn church people how little he thought of them. They weren't even worth a pair of slacks and a dress shirt. And he would expose them to his wife. He would use this opportunity to finally make her see these saints were just plain old sinners in sheep's clothing. She was better off without them. A few years ago, back when her name was still Michelle, she'd actually changed it because hell was in the middle. This business of getting dressed would have gone so differently. Declan would have readied himself first, then rushed into the living room to wait. He would have been watching TV half-heartedly, eager to see her emerge from their bedroom, to see what she'd done this time, what dress, what hairstyle, what color lipstick, what shoe, the slutty platforms that made her taller than him, or the black strappy ones that made her feet look like they had on lingerie. His pulse would have matched the rhythm of her heels down the corridor. When she finally appeared in the living room, though, he would have played it cool, dragging his eyes from the TV. She would have stood in the usual spot between the love seat and the single chair, where she knew he'd have an unobstructed view. Then she would have asked casually, "You ready, Deck?" He would have smiled and nodded with his reply, "Not as ready as you, babes." Now, he dropped his eyes from the mirror and walked over to the dresser for cologne. Ruth held the bottle out, as if she was doing him some great favor. He took it, making sure not to touch her hand. He wished he could, though, and wished that by that one touch, he could exorcise Ruth completely from Michelle's body. Then he would have a reason to go to church, and he would hold her hand the whole time, thank Jesus with all his heart, then take her to dinner afterwards. A fancy knife and fork dinner, just like old times. God knows. He and Ruth hadn't gone out together in what? Years, 2, 3 maybe. He knew the things people said, how they called him understanding for letting Ruth pursue her path, even though he believed differently. The truth was, Declan had been betting all along that Ruth's faith was unsustainable. An experimental flash of fire, like that trick he did in the science lab. Potassium, permanganate, and glycerin, poof, over. With time, though, an uninvited blackness like mold had overrun his hope. This might not be a passing phase. This might be a transmutation. His wife, Michelle, might be permanently gone. In her place, this Bible-thumping freak named Ruth. "Why you have to be such a damn groupie all the time?" Declan snarled at her. "Who cares what your precious bishop predicted? Ain't we agree I could wear anything I want?" He had sensed himself growing desperate lately as this 5th anniversary approached. He hadn't known what to do about it right up to 15 minutes ago when he was in the shower. That's when he decided tonight was the night. He would bring Michelle back, shock her, talk sense into her, ridicule her. He'd take some action tonight. "Yes, but I didn't expect something so demonic," Ruth replied, stabbing another pin into the coil of hair at her neck. She seemed to flinch and then bleed a smile, like she was enjoying a medieval penance. Declan let out a long, juicy stoops and left the bedroom. This was why he needed an outside woman, Trudy, a normal, sane female to balance off this madness. In the corridor, he had a wicked thought that made him veer into the living room to squint at the CD rack. Ah, there, dancehall mix. A disc he'd bought on a whim about a year ago at the Pleasantview traffic lights from a scraggly boy named Silence. Declan had listened to it scornfully at first, had endured the merciless bass, the cussing, the crudeness, punani this, cocky that, right. It wasn't really his thing. He was a smooth, sophisticated man, a jazz and R&B kind of guy. He kept listening to this CD though, because at the time, he'd felt like he needed to. All over Pleasantview, young fellas were in their cars pounding out these styles, and in clubs pushing up on girls to these beats, and in their tiny bedrooms, stinky with sweat, sports, semen, and never washed sheets, banging girls to these rhythms. Declan used to be one of those invincible boys. But at 43, the way his life was going with Ruth, he'd felt he needed to borrow some of that fire, to remember what it was like to be ablaze. The CD had stayed in Declan's car for about a month, became the soundtrack of his drives to and from school. The cuss words stopped grating and he learned the other lyrics without even trying. Then one afternoon, Trudy, the much younger history teacher with no man, had car trouble, so he offered her a ride. The music came on full blast and she looked at him like he was a pervert, like she was ready to report him to the principal. Declan had fumbled with the volume knob and eject button. Sorry, he'd stuttered, tempted to crack the disc in two. But Trudy had smiled in a pouty way and said, "You're versatile, Mr. Rochard." It was a dare. "You're old, but are you cold?" Declan plucked the disc from the shelf and headed to the car to wait for Ruth. So, he was demonic? Fine then. He would go to night service with her. But along the way, he'd teach her what demonic really sounded like. Thank you.
Celeste, that was absolutely amazing. I'm as floored as I was the first time I heard you read, and just was riveted through the entire thing. Your humor, your eye for detail, it's just exceptional. I'm so glad that this book is out in the world, and I am so glad that people are going to be reading your words all across the globe. And I am putting links in the chat again for folks to buy the book if you have not already. But my hope is that it's either in your hands or on its way to you now. And Celeste, I know next up, you are going to be doing your second reading.
Yes, actually. I'll go straight into it. The second story, thank you, Michael. The second story I would like to read from tonight is called Santi Manity, and Hester alluded to it. No, she didn't allude to it. She mentioned it when she was speaking. Santi Manity was the winner of the 2019 Virginia Woolf Award for short fiction. And it also happens to be my favorite story in this entire collection because it was so much fun to write this story in conjunction with the incredible Myron Bruce, also known as Calypso Knight, who was a former, who's a Calypsonian and former extempo champion of Trinidad and Tobago. Big up yourself, Myron, if you're watching. But before I read, I feel like I need to give you all a little bit of cultural context for the word Santi Manity. Santi Manity, sorry, I was distracted by a message in the chat. Santi Manity is a Trinidadian word, which is a corruption of the French sans humanité, which I probably just butchered the French out of. Somebody will, I'm sure somebody, Enzo or somebody will write me and let me know. But loosely translated, it means without mercy. So it's like an exclamation. It's like, Lord of mercy, or oh my gosh, that's the sentiment being conveyed by the word Santi Manity. And that word happens to be the traditional refrain or chorus to an extempo battle, which in our carnival culture is very similar to what Americans would know as a rap battle. So you have two vocalists, Calypsonians, who are facing off against each other. The first one will, on the spot, compose a verse about some political or social topic, or maybe even making fun of the appearance of his opponent. So he will compose that on the spot extemporaneously. And to signal that he has come to the end of his verse and that he is about to hand over the mic, as it were, to his opponent, he will sing that word, Santi Manity. And then his opponent will compose his verse in answer. And to signal that he's come to the end, he will sing his Santi Manity, and they go back and forth like that, trading barbs, if you will, until by the response of the crowd, someone is declared the winner. So to me, the word Santi Manity is a loaded word, and it was particularly appropriate to this collection, to this book, because Santi Manity is, to me, an assertion of dominance and power, a celebration of dominance and power. You know, look what I just did. I just destroyed you. I mashed you up. You know, that's one thing. And it's also a threat and a dare. Like, so let me hear what your answer is. Let me see what you're made of, what you have to say for yourself. You know, so Santi Manity speaks of strength and it speaks of weakness and how those two things interplay. And like I said, I felt that was appropriate in the context of a book where we are exploring the battle of the sexes. We're exploring the tensions that are inherent in a society like ours, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-class, multi-race. You know, I also felt Santi Manity is a very unique identifier of Trinis as a particular brand of Caribbean people who, well, we've chosen to fully embrace music and song and carnival as our way of processing historical trauma and ongoing trauma, really. You know, that's how we cope. So for all of these reasons, this particular story to me is like the culmination, it's the apex of the whole arc of this book. It brings together a number of themes and characters that occurred before in the book, and it sort of opens the doors to the stories that come afterwards. So yes, thank you for listening to me drone on about how important that word is. And now I will read from Santi Manity. The official wake for Mr. H was scheduled for tonight, up the mountain on the grounds of his mansion, Elysium. It was by invitation only. Miss Ivy hadn't received one, and she felt like a chuppity because she'd expected otherwise. Those people owed her, for Christ's sake. Flat on her bed, she studied the continental stains across her 50-something-year-old fiberboard ceiling. She wanted to pee, but her neighbor Winston was in the toilet they shared. He was singing a Frank Sinatra song, I Did It My Way. Had she been feeling better, she would have already marched into the corridor to bang on the door and say, Winston, hush your mouth and open your ass quicker, people waiting. In fact, had she been well, she would have put on her better funeral dress and her fur coat, the same one Joan, the great Mrs. H, had passed along as a retirement gift. And Miss Ivy would have traveled up to Elysium. Invitation or no invitation, she would have gone. But since the night when that young girl, Gail, shot Mr. H, Miss Ivy had been unwell. She'd felt herself succumbing to a weakness that had teeth and tongue and a long, empty belly. At first, thinking it was a case of maljo, she tried all the usual cures for bad eye, saying prayers, bathing with blue laundry soap, pinning blue cloth to her bosom, but nothing had helped. This evening, she'd started hurting here and there all over. And now she wished she could just lie still, die quick, and leave this blasted life. Winston started from the top again. Miss Ivy sucked her teeth, eased up, and planted her swollen feet on the floor. From below the bed, she dragged her blue enamel cozy. The way it scraped the floorboards, she could tell. Under there needed a good sweeping. She hadn't been able with all that bending lately. It made her dizzy in a way she hadn't experienced since that vomit stink boat trip from Grenada to Trinidad when she was 12 years old. She squatted over the posy, began to pee, and the release seemed to make things clear. It's not that she wanted to rub shoulders with the businessman friends and political cronies of Mr. H. No, she would have felt too ashamed to act like she was their equal. Instead, she would have stayed in the kitchen, helping the caterers or something. She might have even remained after the guests left to help clean up. Depending on Joan's mood, Miss Ivy might have even spent the night at Elysia, maybe even a few days, to make sure Joan was sleeping and eating properly instead of chugging coffee, scotch, and Valium. After 20 years of service in that household, Miss Ivy knew that was how Joan coped with stress. You could cook rich people's food, clean their shitty toilets, bend over backward, and keep their dirty secrets for 20-something years. But when one of them dies, suddenly you're not good enough to mourn with them. That's why no invitation had come. Fine, fine, Miss Ivy thought, reaching for the toilet paper inside her bedside table. The door had fallen off since the days when the table belonged to Mr. H's daughter. Let them big shots stay up there with their hors d'oeuvres and posh sippy drinks. A real wake for Mr. H was happening right now, right here in Pleasantview. No invitation was necessary. Anybody could come. Pleasantview people had worked, plenty Pleasantview people had worked for Mr. H. So this was the people's week to prove the small man knew how to grieve for the biggest big shot in the village. We have our own ways to cope, Miss Ivy assured herself. That was probably why Winston was singing that song. He was practicing for tonight. He'd been a popular calypsonian in his day. The Mighty Raven was his sobriquet. And he'd even toured America and met Harry Belafonte, or so he claimed. Winston liked to think he was the official minstrel of Pleasantview Weeks, and he always got offended when other calypsonians showed up. Miss Ivy hoped none would tonight. She wanted a peaceful, quiet week. Feeling as kilkitty as she couldn't handle too much confusion and willy-willy tonight. Okay, now we're gonna skip forward to the week, the actual week. Winston sat on a chair facing the crowd, his back to the all-fours tables. He removed his fedora and rested it on the chair next to him. Under the street lamp, his bald head shone like a dog's balls in moonlight. Miss Ivy guessed that's what he wanted, to be seen, not in shadow as he delivered the song he'd been practicing in the toilet. She was surprised when, instead of Sinatra, Winston began strumming the familiar local chords of an extempo. Help me, he encouraged the crowd. And they joined in, clapping and singing. Pa-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Pa-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Is a real shame and a tragedy. What happened in this here community? Sad to see a big businessman get tied up with that tricky young woman. Although she know the man was married, she push up to make a baby for he. When she couldn't get he money as planned, she abort, then shoot the innocent man. Santi Manity, the crowd sang to end the verse. Then everybody laughed and applauded Winston. Not Miss Ivy. She sat dead-faced, staring at him, but he wouldn't meet her gaze. Winston knew what an ugly betrayal that verse was. He knew it hadn't been an abortion. She and Winston had been the only people there when Gail had thrown open her blue back door and bawled for help. Miss Ivy had gotten to her first and found Gail on the floor, her dress pink everywhere but red between her legs where she had it balled up and pressed down like a drain stopper. Father Jesus, don't tell me you tried to kill the child yourself, Miss Ivy had said, grabbing a kitchen towel. And when Gail said, no, he beat me, Miss Ivy had offered the best lie she could. Don't worry, sometimes they could still save it. Winston had shown up, and by the time they got Gail into the backseat of his car, the towel was soaked and blood was everywhere. On the upholstery, the glass, Miss Ivy's house dress, even on Winston's hands. Those same hands still strumming the guitar. They had been shaking as he backed the vehicle out the yard that evening. How could Winston make a mockery of all that? For what? A few claps? One of the All Fours players sprang up, holding a half-empty rum bottle like a microphone. He moved towards Winston's chair, singing in a voice that could grate cassava. Michael?
Santi Manity.
Winston plucked the guitar. He had no choice, with the crowd clapping and chanting the extempo labwe. Miss Ivy could see, though, Winston's flat smile peeling at the edges, like print on a cheap jersey. He hadn't expected an extempo back. He hadn't expected anyone, especially a nobody non-Calypsonian, to challenge his lyrical mastery.
Yes, Lord. Let Winston punish. Let this young All Fours player put him to shame with lyrics to make people think, and we out to live a string tonight. What you said just now, that is not true. So the facts I came to reveal to you. Old man, my name young girl, and he's showing off. But in the bedroom, he was really soft. He pick up with me, who young, fit, and quick, and she fall in love with my sugar stick. A kid crunchy, with no other one. So I tell she get rid of the old man. Santi Manity.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening to me read. I hope you enjoyed it.
Before we get to the opportunity for those of you in the audience to ask questions of Celeste, we are going to have another of Celeste's faculty mentors from Lesley join her for conversation. And that will be Mr. Tony Eprile.
I'm here.
You are there?
Hi, Tony.
Hello, nice to see you, Celeste. That was wonderful. And I didn't realize you were going to play Santi Manity first. I realized we never had this conversation, but I got to know Short Pants quite well.
Really?
Yeah, we actually shared an Airbnb once. So this was in Montserrat.
Wow.
So delighted to have a chance to hear the Calypso.
Right.
So, Celeste, was I your first mentor or tormentor, whichever?
Well, you know, Tony, I think this is an appropriate time to apologize to you for the fact that you happen to be my second mentor, and you had the unfortunate pleasure of being my mentor while I was pregnant.
Right.
So I remember being extremely hormonally possessed and making your life quite difficult for 6 months.
So, well, I remember it as quite pleasant. So anyway, it is. No, it was really delightful working with you, and having read the book and now having heard you read from the book, it's just such an enormous pleasure for me to see the work you've been doing, how far the work has come, and also how good the work always has been, because that was very evident working with you as a student. So it's just a pleasure to see you. And
Thank
to
you,
hear.
Tony.
So Celeste and I discussed that we were going to talk about multiculturalism. I believe that was the topic. And I was thinking about that today, and I realized I actually don't know what it is. And I'm sure you know very well that I have no problem talking about things that I know nothing about. So this is I'm thinking about it because it's in many ways not the right term for what I want to talk about tonight. It's one of these blanket terms that have come to cover so many different aspects of modern life. And while it's useful in certain respects, it really doesn't, in many ways, it doesn't really tell us what it is that we're talking about. And one of the, sorry, I'm trying not to burn walnuts if you're hearing a ringing in the background. I think one of the things that I've always noticed in your work and I've always loved in your work is the way you use language, and not just the standard lyrical kind of transatlantic English language, but the language that comes from the place in which you live. And for those of you who don't know me, I grew up in South Africa. My father was the editor of a multicultural newspaper. So I really lived in many different worlds in South Africa, not just the standard white South African, in my case, northern suburbs, Jewish, English speaking South African world, but our connections, our family, friends were really the gamut of South African peoples. And one of the things in looking at your book reminded me that my first book of stories was a book about the many cultures of South Africa. And so it's not just the multiculturalism, but the many cultures, but also the way they connected. And my own publisher insisted I have a glossary. I remember a friend saying to me, "Oh, you have a story called Glossary. That's really interesting." It's just in
Yes.
the contents
Yeah.
page. And I'm very glad you didn't go the glossary route. And that one of the things I just find so effective and powerful in your work is the looking at the different Englishes of Trinidad, of the country you live in, and how one celebrates these different Englishes. They are as relevant, as important and valuable, and in many ways more powerfully lyrical and emotive than what's the standard transatlantic English of television and say the BBC. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. I love the way you cover the voices and thoughts of so many different characters, from Sunil to Omar, Mr. Jagru, Kimberly, Miss Ivy, Consuela. You have a very good ear. And if you can talk a little about that aspect of writing.
Yes. First of all, I'm laughing because I was going to say to you, Tony, that you have a very good ear, because you picked up on something there. You said the very many different Englishes of Trinidad, and that's the thing. There's a tendency to say Trinidad Creole as if it was, a monolithic thing, and it isn't. Depending on where you are in Trinidad, I mean, it's a small place, but really and truly, depending on where you are, the Creole is different. It can be very, very different. And so, yes, the Creole that Sunil speaks is different from the Creole that Luther speaks, because there are fine differences. And I know that the average reader may not read it, and he won't know, like intellectually know that there's a difference, but I want to believe that he will hear the slight difference. I say all that to say I think during my time at Lesley, I didn't start Lesley wanting to write in Trinidad Creole. I started Lesley wanting to write in very beautiful, romantic, formal Elizabethan English, if you will. Because my whole upbringing and my career up to that point led me to think that very fancy English and very big words, that was good writing. But as I started to want to tell the stories of, Trinidadians, I realized that that could never be a sufficient medium in which to tell these stories. You have to tell it in the voice of the place. And the thing about Trinidad is that rhythm is such an integral part of life here, of culture. It's a part of how we speak. It's a part of everything. So if you take the rhythm out of the stories, then you're not telling the stories truthfully. So I had to learn. I had to come to terms with my own self and give myself permission to try to learn to write with our rhythm. It was not easy, but in the end, after I had a lot of time at Lesley to practice, I was able to start doing that with some level of confidence. And yes, now if I have to write in some version of Trinidad Creole, yes, I can do it. But there's a story in the book, Home. Home is set in Barbados. And the main characters, one is a Trinidadian and one is a Barbadian or Bajan, as we say. And I was extremely insecure and nervous about writing Bajan Creole because it's not my mother tongue, if you will. So there's always that, and I think that's something for all writers wanting to write outside of standard English. When you're writing the voice of the other, what do you do? How do you deal with your insecurities? Where do you go?
It's a legitimate and important question, because I find, particularly today, so many of my students are reasonably worried about the question of appropriation. And here, they might not realize that a Trinidadian could be worrying about appropriating a Bajan English, or Bajan Creole, as it's called. And I actually want to backtrack for one moment and also say that one thing that bothers me is how we don't have a good word for these other forms of English. They're called vernacular, they're called Creole, they're called, in South Africa, that language is often, I've heard referred as rotten English, which is which is actually by some of the writers who write in that language have used that term. The linguistic term is macaronic, which is referring to how many different streams of other languages come into it, whether in Trinidad it's Spanish and Indian, English, Arawak and Carib, and many different. For South Africa, we got Portuguese and Zulu and Malay. I mean, there's this a whole range of languages. So we need to come up with a good term for that. But I think one of the powerful elements in your work is that willingness to extend your own imagination out and your observation out into the whole world in which you live, and not try to say, I will only write the people I know, I'll only write my immediate surroundings and my own self, but doing it with respect and care and worrying about it as part of it. So
I think it's important to worry about it, because it's important to not disrespect the cultures and the languages that we're trying to portray, and we're not trying to create caricatures. It's it's so easy, especially, and it's so easy to have prejudice unknowingly seep in. I remember the first time I tried to write Consuela, actually with you. Consuela came to be under your watch. And the first time I tried to write her, it was you who pointed out to me that I was I was being a little bit condescending because she is a Venezuelan immigrant, and because maybe some of my own prejudice at that time was seeping into the writing. I was coloring her, and I was writing her her halting English, her Spanglish. I was writing it in a way that wasn't very literary, let's put it that way, and creating this caricature of, you know, you don't know and you know how they write Latin people.
Right.
So we always have to, I think you can't let your guard down when you're writing multi-ethnic or cultures. You really do always have to be sensitive and check yourself whether or not you're letting other things seep into the writing.
And I think something we haven't touched on here is, while doing all these things, maintaining a sense of humor, because this has been part of our friendship and
Yes.
connection for such a long time. So
Yeah, I've really enjoyed having I just felt that you uniquely could understand where I was coming from with the humor, because, you know, South Africa, I find like sometimes the comments you would make, they're so akin to life. Life in South Africa seems so similar to life in Trinidad. And I'm glad we could have had the time to sort of.
I am too. I'm seeing some mentions here of our late beloved friend Wayne Brown, and we had many discussions about this, how similar, how different our backgrounds were, but also how similar that history of having colonial education while being part of a very rich multi-ethnic culture were. And so, yes, that's just been again a pleasure, and I was so reminded of it when I read your book.
Yes.
So everyone here, you need to go out and read Celeste's wonderful collection, novel in stories. It's a terrific work.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Michael, over to you.
Thank you. And in just a moment, we are going to open things up for Q&A with Celeste. For those of you in the audience who have questions, we're going to ask that you please use the raise hand function in Zoom to ensure that she's able to respond to your questions. You can find that function by clicking on the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I will moderate the question asking. I will be calling on people. So if you have questions, raise your hands and Celeste will be happy to answer them. And we'll also entertain flattering comments and glowing reviews as well. And Celeste, while folks are formulating their, oh, wait, we have a question already. So it's from Fernanda Fisher, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name.
Hi, Celeste. It's Fernanda. I am
Hi.
so proud of you and so excited that you had this and I was able to be here. I love listening to you read, and your writing just so captures everything that one wants in a story. And I love the dialogue and the sense of humor, but also of seriousness in your work. And I am really looking forward to getting my copy. And I hope that my book club will be able to read it, and maybe you can come and you can speak via Zoom, even if we're done with Zoom at that point in time. But I'm really proud of you and so happy that I was able to be here with you.
Thank you, Fernanda. I'm glad you came. I'm so happy you came. And of course, I mean, if your book club wants to discuss it, if you remember, before COVID happened, I was supposed to come to Vermont in October. So yeah, I would be happy to see those orange leaves fall while we discuss Pleasantview.
It'd be wonderful. Wonderful.
Thanks again.
Any other questions, folks, or comments for Celeste? Cindy Allman.
Hi, Celeste. I literally spent my entire night last night reading this amazing book. I started reading it and I could not put it down. I felt it was well written. I feel like the characters were distinct. I felt like I was transported to Pleasantview. I felt I liked that Rachel Manley did the introduction because it really did set me up. Because she was like, yes, it's like Miguel Street, but there's a modern day. And I'm like, this is a very big proclamation because Miguel Street is one of my all-time favorite books. And I felt she really did a great job of comparing these two books because it was so well done. Congratulations. I see this being a favorite for Caribbean readers. One of my questions would be, how long did it take you to write this book? Why was it a collection of interconnected short stories as opposed to a novel itself? That would be my question.
Sure. Well, firstly, thanks for coming, Cindy. And before I answer your question, I just want to say, Rachel, yes, she did a fantastic job on the foreword to the book. And I will tell you, I'll be honest, when I read it, I felt two things. I was touched, I cried, but I was crying because I was touched and I was crying because I was scared because her comparison to Miguel Street and the other esteemed writers mentioned in the foreword, it was I felt a little bit scared. So I'm glad that you feel it lived up to that comparison. The book is a novel in stories because I wrote this. This was my thesis. In its earliest form, it was my thesis. It was 6 stories at the time, written during the time that I was at Lesley. And so the stories were written over the course of 2 years of learning how to write and submitting work every month to Hester and Michael and Tony. And after graduating, I continued working on that core of 6 stories until it became what it is now. So I had these stories, and at the point of handing in my thesis, I realized that without me intending to, they were kind of linked. And so I came up with this idea with Hester's help that if I just tweaked them and I just drew out some of the characters, I could have something very similar to a novel in stories. And so that's the route I took. So I would say that this book took from 2014, when I started the MFA program, to 2019. I was working on these stories all that time. So that's, that's how long it took to write these 9 stories. And since 2019 to now, I've been tweaking minor tweaks, but yeah, that's how it came to be.
Worth every minute, if you ask me. Any other questions or comments for Celeste? Outright declarations of praise, brilliance. I'm incredibly grateful, Celeste, that you have shared this much of your book and your creative process with us. This has been a tremendous pleasure for me. This has been a moment of intense pride for Cambridge Common writers and for all of your fellow Lesley alums. And I am looking forward to having the book in my hands. I had hoped it would be here by tonight, but it looks like anticipation is just going to make reading it that much sweeter. So if you all would like to unmute and give 3 cheers or clap or whistle for Celeste, by all means, please do.
You guys are going to make me cry.
Oh, it looks like we've got a question from Shiromi Turaya. And did I get that kind of right?
Yeah, you did.
Yes, you did. I mean, I'm amazed, but you did. Thank you. Well, I'm Celeste's friend from Belize, so I have to say something. I've known Celeste for about over 15 years.
Yes.
And I have to say, I think I'm so inspired to see Celeste creating a path based on her passion and bringing this book and sharing it with us. And so I just have to say congratulations, and I'm truly inspired by you and the work you're doing, and I look forward to more. So keep it up, Celeste. Thank you.
Thank you, Romy.
No problem.
And we have another raised hand from Sharon Millar.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I just wanted to say I could not say hi because I was at Lesley as well. I was there from 2010 to 2012 on the recommendation of Wayne Brown. And it's such a delight to hear Celeste read. And Celeste, I just want to say thank you so very, very much for sort of taking over the torch. The work is, as always, beautiful, very multi-layered, so indicative of us. You know, and it gives me great pleasure tonight to sit here, great pleasure and pride to be sort of your colleague and having sort of gone before, and I think we will be very proud tonight. And I just want to say hi to all the Lesley folks.
Yes. Hi, Sharon. Well, Sharon, I'm glad you reminded me that you were here, because I did want to say thank you. I did want to, before we close off, say thank you to a couple people locally, and you were one of them, to say thank you for. I went to Lesley because you recommended it, really, and you put me in touch with Stephen. So I wanted to thank you for your support and your direction at a time when I did not know what to do with this desire of mine to write. I also wanted to publicly thank Rosalind Carrington, who referred me to you. I'll tell you something about Rosalind. I don't know if she's on or not right now, but in 2012, when I wrote my novel, my little baby novel, when I thought I could write, I did not know what to do with this novel and this desire to write. And so I started reaching out to local writers that I knew of and asking for some direction and some help. And pretty much nobody responded, because really, who am I, right? Who was I? But Rosalind responded, and she didn't have to. And she agreed to read my novel, and she read it, and she gave me very useful feedback and encouraged me at a time when nobody else did. And I actually remember she agreed to meet, like she agreed to physically go to Grand Bazaar food court and meet with me to discuss my book. And when first thing she said to me was, I want you to know that I think this is really good. This is one of the best things I've read in a long time. And I broke down crying and blubbering all over the food court, because nobody had ever said anything like that to me before, and it gave me hope. So I have Rosalind and Sharon to thank for starting me on this journey. I also want to publicly thank my family, my mother and my husband, my sister, not in blood, but my sister from another Mr. Stacy Chambers, and my little sweetie, my daughter. These are the people who have been my day ones, supporting me and sacrificing with me all of these years. So thank you, guys. And let's not forget my cousins, who give me so much material to write about.
Thank you again, Celeste, and thank you everyone for joining us for this incredible event. I hope if you're a Lesley alum who has not joined Cambridge Common Writers yet, please go to cambridgecommonwriters.org and get in touch with us. Let's get you on our site. Let's get you into our network. And, we produce book launches like this for alums, and we want to celebrate your successes. So Celeste, thank you for letting us shine a spotlight on you tonight. And Michael and Hester and Tony, thank you for your help.
Did you guys bring something to drink? Because we need to toast Pleasantview. So I have something.
Yeah, I got a little something. So to Pleasantview and
To
to
Pleasantview.
the woman who brought Pleasantview
I
into
come
the
back
world.
for the toast for sure.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.